What's up? Not a car guy here, and today I will be installing rear lower control arms in my 2004 Ford Mustang GT. There are many reasons why you would upgrade your rear lower control arms in a new Edge Mustang. The main reason being that the original stock OEM bushings in the control arms are made of a soft rubber, which allows for a lot of axle deflection. I've also written a pretty in-depth article about buying control arms and all of the different options that you encounter, because it can be pretty overwhelming. It was for me. I didn't really know what I was getting into, but after doing a lot of research, I put together a whole lot of useful information to help you just decipher what control arms are best suited for your goals. There's a whole lot to say about your rear suspension and the control arm upgrades. However, this is an install video, so I'm gonna get to it. Chock the front wheels, crack the lugs, and release the parking brake. You can place the jack on the rear differential to get the car in the air, and for this job, the jack stands can go under the axle. Take the rear wheels off to gain access to the control arms. First thing we're going to do is remove the sway bar. You have two bolts. One of them is hiding behind this ABS line that you'll just remove from the bracket. Sometimes you might have to get a little creative in removing the line from the bracket. I used a screwdriver to pry it out on the other side. You have two bolts. Both of them are 13 millimeter. I'm going to get a deeper socket. Give me a little more clearance on that. I should note that my sway bar had nuts that were mounted onto it, so I only had to unscrew the bolts, but you might need to put an extra socket on the backside if the nut is free moving. Once you remove all four bolts, pull the sway bar out from under the car and set it aside. You'll need to support the control arm with the jack. You want to make sure that you've got that jack under that control arm, because it is holding in up that spring. And if that bolt comes out, that spring is just going to launch that control arm down and might dislodge or damage something. So use the jack to slowly lower the control arm after you get the bolt out. To remove the bolt, hit it with some penetrating oil first. Then if you want to take a shortcut, use a breaker bar. Or you can struggle like me and hit things with a rubber mallet pretending like it's doing something. I used a breaker bar on the other side and it worked like a charm. I used my arm strength with a short wrench on this side and it about gave me an aneurysm. By the way, it's a 21 millimeter on the nut on the outside and an 18 millimeter for the bolt on the inside. After you get the nut off the bolt, continue unscrewing the bolt from the other sides. The bolt is long and only has threads on the end of it, while the rest of the bolt is smooth. So continue to unscrew the bolt until you get past the threads. Now, this is the part where you want to make sure this control arm is supported by the jack. Once you can easily slide the bolt back and forth, you're past the threads. From here, you need to adjust the jack until you find the right amount of tension between the jack and the spring to relieve tension on the bolt. Get it the best you can and then give the bolt a good pull. So now I'm going to slowly release the jack. Make sure that my jack stand is in a good place. Now pull the jack out and remove the spring. sure you get the isolators. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the bolt that's mounted to the chassis of the car. And then once we get that out, we'll just take out the whole control arm. So there's a bolt blocked by this stupid ABS cable. So I'm going to get a wrench back there, on here, and then in the back side. And this is so dang tedious. 221 millimeter on this side with very minimal room to work, and then 18 millimeter blind on the back side. I can't see. Penetrating oil on the nut is a good idea. You don't have much space for your wrench to move, which makes this very tedious. You probably can't use a breaker bar on this one, so you'll just have to muscle through it. After you get the nut loosened, you'll have to get a socket on the backside to keep the bolt from turning. Be prepared to fumble around a lot on this bolt because you can't see what you're doing and it's all by feel. You're probably going to sound like you're clanging around just to be annoying. Once your wrench is secure on the backside, keep turning the 21 millimeter until you can remove the nut completely. Now that you have the nut off, just pull the bolt out. Oh, unless your exhaust is in the way, in which case you're going to have to unfasten the exhaust mounts to give you enough room to get the bolt out. There's a bracket back there that connects to this dumb thing that holds that in, and that one back there is also holding the exhaust in place. And if I just remove that bracket or undo it, I think I can move it over so I can get that bolt out. So that bolt peeking out back there is a 10 millimeter, and then there's another one just on the other side of this back there. If you have a socket extension, it's going to be particularly useful in unfastening the bolt that is closer to you and hidden. Alright, you get the idea. You'll also have to unfasten the exhaust mount at the tip of the exhaust. Your socket extension is going to be very useful here too. Unfortunately, I didn't think about using an extension until I moved to the other tailpipe. I recommend that you work each bolt a little at a time and then move on to the other bolt. The exhaust is really pushing down on that bracket, and if you get one bolt all the way out first, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to get the other bolt out. Once you unfasten both exhaust mounts, it should give you enough space to get the bolt completely out. You're going to have to push with your hand on the exhaust and hope that it bends enough to give you enough space to get that bolt out. God. There it is. That stupid bolt. It's always fun to look at the old control arms and see just how crappy your bushings actually are. Holy smokes. That one is really fried. Okay, so that bracket right there actually needs to be reoriented. I need to take the metal piece and basically put it on the other side. In order to do that, I need to remove the parking brake cable, which I will show you how to do. Alright, so basically you got the parking brake cable here, and there's this little clip here that holds the cable in. So you want to basically, I think you unlatch that and then pull the pin out, and then you can pull the cable through this hole, through this bracket. You know what? Let's get some gloves on. And it's gone. I got it. Oh, and make sure that your parking brake is off. it is. And off comes the bracket. So basically I'm going to take this piece off and then I'm going to flip the bracket and then put the piece on top. This is a 8mm. So pull this off, flip this around, and then put this on top like so. So now you can just slide that back on. And then reattach your parking brake cable. What I'm doing here is specifically for Maximum Motorsports control arms with 3-piece bushings as well as spherical bearings. Those red things are bushings. Take one of the outer pieces and using the grease supplied by Maximum Motorsports, lube all of the inner parts of the piece. Here you see me skip lubing the inside because I read the instructions to a T. But you should definitely use common sense and lube the inside of the ring because you'll have to slide that metal cylinder through. Now insert the end of the bushing into the control arm like so. Take the middle piece of the bushing and start lubing it with the grease. You're going to want to make sure you lube every surface on this piece. Now insert it into the control arm on the opposite side of the piece you just installed. Using the end of a mallet works great to push the bushing piece all the way in. You don't see me doing it here, but I did it on the other bushing and it was much easier. Now grease the third piece and insert it into the control arm like so. Now take a flathead screwdriver and work the grease into the fluted grooves on the inside of the bushing. Lube the metal cylinder and slide it into the center of the bushing pieces. If I had lubed the inside of the first piece, the cylinder would go in much easier. It went nice and easy the second time, but I do recommend using the blunt end of your mallet to push it through. Now lube the outside of the bushing so that it slides easily into the chassis mount. And grease the black urethane pieces, then insert them into the spherical bearing end of the control arm. And do the same with the other piece. I recommend that you save some grease to re-lubricate the outside of the spherical bearings right before you insert that end into the axle mount. Now is a good time to address a discrepancy in the instructions I received from Maximum Motorsports. I followed the paper instructions that came with the control arms, which led me to actually installing the control arm on the wrong side. Because of this, the sway bar mount was too far away from the ABS bracket to properly mount it. I checked the instructions PDF that I downloaded from the Maximum Motorsports website, and they were in the complete opposite orientation as the paper instructions. I emailed the tech about the situation, and he told me that the digital copy was the most up-to-date instructions and that I should follow them. So to ensure that you're putting the correct control arm on the correct side, make sure of the following. 1. The spherical bearings go in the axle mount. 2. The sway bar goes on the outside, not the inside. And 3. The Maximum Motorsports logo is going to go outside along with the sway bar mount. If you use these identifiers, you'll get the correct control arm on the correct side, and you won't have to do your work all over again like I did. Man, learning is painful. Alright, so after putting in the wrong one, successfully I might add, I got it out and I lubed up the bushings and got them all put in, so I'm about to put in the correct arm on the driver's side. Bushing side goes to the chassis mount. And the bolt goes to the back side so that I can get it in there. Already did this once. Can do it again. Right. Just a tip to make your life easier, you can prop up the end of the control arm with something. I used my spring when I was trying to put the exhaust mounts back on. Got it. After you get the bolt all the way through, screw the nut on, but don't tighten it all the way down. You'll need to have a little play in the control arm when you're putting it in the axle mount. After the chassis bolt is secure, you can tighten down the muffler mounts. After you get the exhaust mounts secure, put the isolators back on the spring perch and the top of the spring. And then put the spring on the spring perch of the control arm. So just make sure that the spring is seated on that top patch as well as the spring perch on the control arm. And make sure that the pigtail is facing back like so. When I raise the control arm, it does not actually align properly with the mount on the axle. So one thing that I've done to try to work it in there is actually when I'm at the same time compressing the spring with the jack, I pull the jack over slightly to try to align that, try to align the arm into that mount. The problem that I'm running into is like once I get to the top, the jack is pressing against the mount instead of the arm and I can't quite get the bolt hole to align. So my solution is I borrowed a second jack from my dad and hopefully I can come behind and push up on that arm just a tad to get the whole bolt hole to align and then slide that bolt through. And we'll see if that works. If you lift the axle off the jack stand, be very careful when you're moving the jack to the side. If you move the jack too far, it could cause the jack stand on the other side to buckle and the car could come crashing down. Always keep a close watch on where your jack stands are in case you bump them. Before you ever lower your jack, make sure those jack stands are looking secure. Always be safe. Alright, so here's this fun jack setup that I've got on here. Got one supporting the back. Putting a second jack on the control arm under the sway bar mount provided enough support that allowed me to reposition the main jack when I needed to. Putting in the bolts sounds so much more simple than it actually is, but I got a lot of practice at it, and by the third time doing it, it went pretty quickly. So let me just share you the process I took that made things much easier. Align the bolt hole of the control arm with the hole on the mount the best you can. Prioritize the inside of the control arm first. If you can fit the tip of the bolt in through the mount and the control arm, give it a pound with the mallet and see if it goes through. Oh, hallelujah. It's probably going to get caught on the other side, so once you push the bolt through most of the way, you can see the tip poking out the other end. Once you see the bolt poking through, you can reposition the jack to get an even better position and then hit it with the mallet and it'll go all the way through. It's definitely going to be a game of just moving the jack up and down and trying to get the least amount of tension on that bolt so that when you hit it with your hammer, you can just get it through, and it'll work. It just, depending on your car and its foibles, it's gonna be a little different each time. One of the previous owners of my car actually backed into a tractor, so I have no idea what's going on in this back end. This may be way more difficult for me than it will be for you, but this is how I got it done, and there's probably a few tricks in here that are going to be useful to you. I'm not gonna lie, that took so long. I hope and I pray that it is easier for you and everything just aligns properly. I'm just going to adorn my work with some thread locker. Directions call for torquing of 111 foot-pounds. There it goes. Make sure to tighten down the bolt at the chassis end of the control arm. The instructions call for the bolts to be torqued at 111 foot-pounds, so if you have a torque wrench and can fit it in there, put it to use. After you get that bolt torqued, the first rear lower control arm will be in. Now repeat those steps on the other side. Have fun. Alright, I got the other side in, so now I'm going to install the sway bar. To install the sway bar, make sure to orient it correctly. The proper orientation can be seen here. Maximum Motorsports supplied me with 4 new bolts, along with nuts, and this spacer that can go in between the sway bar and the control arm if you have a gap there. Just to make installing the sway bar easy on myself, I put the 2 ends up on jacks to hold it in place. Then I took a toolbox to prop up the center, just so I wasn't having to fight the weight of the bar on the other end. Align the ABS bracket with the hole in the sway bar mount as well as the hole in the sway bar. Put the bolt in and screw it in. But don't tighten it down all the way yet. Wait until you get the other side bolted in. On the other side, slide in the spacer and try to align the hole in the spacer with the holes in the control arm and the sway bar. I used a screwdriver to help line up the holes in all 4 pieces. Don't forget that the bolt also has to go through the ABS bracket here. Once the holes are aligned, get the bolt and screw it in. Then do the same with the other bolt and tighten both of them down. Don't forget to put the ABS lines back in their brackets. You may need to bend the bracket a bit to get the cable back in. Now tighten down all the bolts on both sides. Verify that the parking brake is working. I almost forgot. If you've got new wheels, put those bad boys on there. With new lower control arms in, my rear suspension is now ready for a wider set of tires. I will do a full review in another video, but here's a sneak peek. Alright, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Comment if you have any questions, and I'll see if I can help. Hopefully this helped you out. I'm not a car guy, but I will be. Giddy up!